A big topic in the world of open innovation is today entrepreneurship. And this topic is closely connected to another one that is called venture building or venture studios. So entrepreneurship, venture builders, venture studios is something that is a very, very hot topic, talking about a big issue that are how corporates can innovate and can leverage ideas that are coming from inside the organization and can move from these ideas into, let's say, autonomous business unit or sometimes also into autonomous ventures. So this is the big topic. My name is Roberto Netti. I'm the president and chairman of Mind the Bridge. And today we will deep dive this topic in our Mind the Chat with Daniel Alexus.
Great to be here. Thank you, Alberto.
Hi, Daniel. So Daniel, just for the people who don't know him, is the global head of Ericsson ONE. And Ericsson ONE is, let's say, I don't know how to define it, I will let it to you, but if I have to provide the definition of Ericsson ONE is the innovation factory inside Ericsson. And so, Daniel, I would like, first of all, to hear from you, to introduce yourself, introduce what Ericsson and specifically Ericsson ONE are doing.
Great. Happy to. So first off, super great to be here and discuss this, for me, very important topic. If we just start with, Ericsson and Ericsson's goals in the world, our purpose is really to create connections to make the unimaginable possible. And of course, if you like innovation and you think you think about that space, imagining possible or making the impossible possible is, of course, a very big driver. Our vision as a company is a world where limitless connectivity improves people's lives, redefines businesses, and pioneers a sustainable future. And across these three dimensions, it's a fantastic space to be in if you think about ideation and incubation, which is really where we're targeting. So if we move over to Ericsson ONE, we are really set up as the growth engine for the company when it comes to tapping into entrepreneurial power. And we should remember, Ericsson is a multi-international big company. We're 100,000 plus people across the globe in 180 plus countries. So of course, innovation has been and is part of the and fully sort of ingrained within the company. But what has not been effectively managed is how we tap into entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurial spirit that we have within that community. So when we set up Ericsson ONE, which I got the opportunity to do in 2018, we really set out the mission to tap into that entrepreneurial spirit and that entrepreneurial power, and ultimately turn that into a growth engine for the company. So our mission in life is to identify and both ideas, but as well as entrepreneurs with the right ideas, and take them from an idea to an emerging growth business for Ericsson. And there's a multitude of ways in which we do this, and I can talk more specifically around it. But I also wanted to sort of put the context on. So Ericsson ONE is housed or hosted within what we call the business area technologies and new businesses, which really is a whole business area focused around the growth elements of what Ericsson is on the outlook to do. So that mission is to create and scale businesses that accelerate strategic and sustainable growth for Ericsson. And there's a couple of inflows or opportunities that we tap into. So one is Ericsson ONE, and we can deep dive into that. And we call it a venture studio, but it is solely focused, as I said, on the entrepreneurial power and the entrepreneurs within the company. There are three other levers that our business area taps into, and one is mergers and acquisitions. Another is moving internal units or products that are in need of a bit of more autonomy to be accelerated. And then we also house a set of strategic business development efforts that can start sort of anywhere in the company as well, but usually starts in one of our strategy departments or within our technology units.
Question for you before deep diving into Ericsson ONE. What you did before 2018 and before starting this growth engine, as you define it?
So I've been with Ericsson now 13 years or so. Actually had my fingers on new ideas and startups already during my my schooling, some Master of Science in Engineering and Management, and we actually had an early ideation project going on in Africa where we were trying to save fishermen's lives on Lake Victoria. That was probably the first time that I got the taste of what it means to build a new business. And I was also number 3 sort of employee at a music distribution company that was actually the first one to supply independent music or independent artists to the likes of Spotify and iTunes. But in Ericsson, I've been doing a multitude of things. I've been in both sort of the back-end systems of finance, procurement, IT, operations, etc. But I've also been I've been out in both Silicon Valley as well as in Boston. On the first round, I actually ran an internal innovation group within our IT, serving the Ericsson community then with new innovative ICT solutions. And in the latter, I had driven an acquisition of a sort of late-stage scale-up within the enterprise billing domain. This was in 2014. And after we closed on that acquisition, I took the general manager role for that for 3 years or so. So that was what led me up to taking on this.
Because again, is not easy to start such a journey inside of corporate settings, and I think you know that. And again, because you need typically to play the ability to play both sides. On the one hand, the side that is the typical corporate side, the ability to stay in a Fortune 500 boardroom. That is one attitude, because give you credibility. And on the other hand, you have also to play the side of the startup environment, so to be able to work in a garage in a sort of bootstrapped environment. And again, these two kind of things are not easy to be matched. And so that's why you need to nurture, you need to have probably some entrepreneurial blood inside your veins, and but also having the ability to navigate through the corporate politics that is the part that typically kill most of the people that have this kind of
I think it's a good observation. I think it's the biggest sort of natural friction that you have when it comes to innovation within a large corp. So when we say tapping into the entrepreneurial world, that of course means that we're looking for entrepreneurial people, but there is a big difference between an entrepreneur and an intrapreneur. But there is a cross section here between sort of the world of big corporations and the world of entrepreneurship. Where they meet is where you find these intrapreneurs, and the trick is really to find the benefits and the levers that you actually get from innovating and starting up a business within Ericsson, where you have, as I said, right? I mean, we have reach into 180 plus countries. We have customers all over the world. Nowadays, after the 2 acquisitions of both Cradlepoint within the enterprise networking space, as well as Vonage quite recently, which actually gets us access to 1 million plus application developers. We have now 3 established at-scale go-to-markets that we actually can deploy any new type of product or offering into. These are, of course, immense benefits if you are a startup, not to mention all the technology and all the know-how that sits in the company. That said, there is a natural slowness of trying to innovate within a big corp. because you're living within the boundaries of also, or under the umbrella of what the big corporation has to do. So things like trade compliance, things like compliance across the board, security, etc. The things that you, in all essence, figure out as a startup, you have to think up front about when you're a startup within a big corporation, so that you don't risk Ericsson's business on account of innovation.
Yes.
But I find it quite interesting. I think, and I think here is where you find the entrepreneurs versus the entrepreneurs. The entrepreneurs get it. They see the upside at least outweigh the downside, but we should not kid ourselves. There is always a downside.
Yes, there is always. So let's focus on Ericsson ONE. And again, in this picture, I think is represented the process that you internally use from extracting innovation from inside the corporate boundaries. Can you navigate us through?
Absolutely. So we've been running this now for quite some time, as I said. I mean, we started to establish it in 2018. I would say we were more or less up and running start of 2019. On an annual basis, we stimulate, and that's the activity we call initiation. We stimulate ideation or idea thinking throughout the community by driving open houses. We're driving fairs. We are posting global challenges. They are either coming out through emails or on your locked Ericsson managed workplace PC screen, or Apple, if you will, and we drive people towards our very open and transparent to all ideation platform called IdeaDrop. So here is an ability you can drop an idea. It can be at any stage or maturity. And you can also choose, if you want to be anonymous when you drop the idea. If that is a reason for you, an inhibitor for you, you can do this in sort of a cloaked fashion. And the benefit of that is, of course, that if the idea takes off, if it gets good comments and quite a bit of discussion, then you're able to unveil yourself. But then that fear of potentially dropping an idea that you were afraid people would think were stupid, we've taken that away. So that's actually quite a big benefit. But as you can see, I mean, on an annual basis, we actually churn through somewhere between 500 and 1,000. The latter years have actually been upwards towards 1,000 ideas on an annual basis. And
question here.
Go for it.
For the idea drop, that is important for the ideation phase, is constrained to some strategic main directories, or someone can put any idea of they like?
It's a good question. So the simple answer is you can put any idea. It doesn't matter. But we are supporting and steering our ideation towards the areas we think are the most attractive and the most likely for Ericsson to succeed in. And we're being open about this as well. So, right, in terms of being transparent around the areas we think are hot, and we drive a lot of activation or initiation then towards those areas, right, to drive the majority of the ideas towards what we think is the right type of growth strategy for the company. But naturally, if you are open to anything, you are also going to get a lot of exploration, and that's good. So if you look at the total funnel that we have from the time we invest, so from ideation and onwards, roughly 75% of the pipeline is directed or correlated to the established growth strategy of the company, whilst 25% is outside, so more explorative. And it's actually an interesting note. So if you back up the tape, we have had this relationship probably all throughout, but the interesting piece is that what we had as explorations a couple of years ago are now very much part of the growth strategy of today. And that's where you will find, of course, that if you tap into innovation and entrepreneurship, they are also going to guide and lead the way. So you might even be ahead of established corporate growth strategies. And that we've actually found to be true. given the hit rate today, because ultimately, of course, initiation activities will take you roughly 2 years until you are at incubation industrialization. So it is a journey, but the hit rate on that journey has been quite high.
And there is a specific timeline to apply, or is it always open?
No, it's always open, and we run. I can talk about that in the process here, how often we run this, but every year we churn through a set of new decisions, and we do it on different time frames or different number of times a year, depending on the stage. But just to connect back on sort of the strategic fit, if you will, and there are 3 things that we try to help our entrepreneurs to think about when it comes to, why should you build a startup within Ericsson? There has to be, of course, an answer to the question, why Ericsson, and to the point of leveraging some of the benefits. So what we're looking at is 3 things. One is which types of focused industry verticals do we believe have a lot of sort of core elements that are relevant for us? So that would mean there has to be a high level of disruption going on. The industry as itself has to be growing, because that means that new entrants are also able to capitalize on the rotations within the market. And it's always good, of course, if this is connected to doesn't have to be directly, but at least indirectly to mobility and movement of things. So naturally, areas like automotive and transport, smart manufacturing, connected logistics, and the likes are ending up on some of these focused industry verticals where we drive a lot of initiation activity. The other dimension is to think about which technology assets or capabilities are we strong at and do we have in-house. Of course, here, similarly, connectivity, cloud, edge, IoT, machine learning, and AI are the usual suspects. So they will also heighten the ability to execute and ultimately the feasibility of an idea. And then the third one is sort of a scaling question of how can you leverage the established go-to-market machineries that we now have in the company. And that has vastly opened up over the last few years, then with a few acquisitions, both within the enterprise space as well as within the small and medium business and developer community. So that's those we use to sort of guide the ideation against. But again, we are also open to explorations.
Very good, interesting. So let's go back
to about the first investment stage.
Your journey, yes.
Let me take you through the journey then. So ultimately, we run something we call Angels Rooms, where we take our ideation decisions. They are essentially rapid prototypes. They should take somewhere between 6 to 12 weeks to execute, and they should not cost a lot. They should be around $10,000 to $15,000 US. This is a phase where we don't change anything in terms of the individuals, right? This is done by people on nights and weekends, which is actually a good litmus test to the passion that these people have. Because if there's one thing you will know if you work in startups or in any type of new business ventures, you have to have passionate people who are willing to go that extra mile. So that's a good test. And we take roughly, somewhere between 20 to 40 ideation decisions on an annual basis, talking about volumes here, right? So out of the 800 to 1,000 ideas, 20 to 40 gets this first tranche of investment. The key element here is you should have described a problem statement that is clear enough in terms of, do we think this problem is real? Do we think people actually care about this to be solved, and would they be willing to pay for that? If you can convey that strongly enough, you will get that first investment. And your ultimate game or ultimate target throughout this phase is come back with a customer in hand that essentially is telling you that if you build this prototype into a real product, I will pay for that. if you succeed with that, then you're coming to our Incubation MVP stage, or to our Dragon's Den, that we run 4 times a year, so once a quarter. And it's only one, so we do this globally. We take roughly between 8 and 12 new MVP decisions on an annual basis. MVP, of course, standing for minimum viable product. And this is also, it's a 6 to maybe 8 or maximum 12 month of an engagement. But here and now, we're talking about a dedicated project. So here we expect a core team of individuals to step out of their current roles into this full time or more, and to make this a reality. And here we're helping that to happen also by negotiating internally. We also have an entrepreneurial fellowship program, which essentially means you can take a leave of absence from your current role to participate in this type of opportunity. As you can see, so 6 to 12 months turns into somewhere between 100 and 300K US, depending on the type of proposition. And at the end of this phase, you should have a first sellable object in terms of a product, right? So you should be able to sign up commercial paid trials with customers at the end of the Incubation MVP phase. If you succeed with doing that, then you can come into our global Pioneers Nest. This is done or run twice a year, and here we're really taking the decision around industrializing the opportunity, right? So here, based on the fact that you have commercial paid trials with customers, we're willing to say, all right, so show us now the avenue to a scale up phase, and to a real growth business, and commercialize the product so it's defendable from a product lifecycle management standpoint when it comes to Ericsson, with all what that means in terms of product security, privacy, trade compliance, etc., right? So here, depending on the type of proposition, the investment phase will also vary. It may take somewhere between 12 and 24 months, and it will cost somewhere between $1 and $6 million US usually to execute. And here we take 2 to 3 of these decisions also on an annual basis. And by the way, and here is the first time when we actually create organizations. So before, it's been either on your free time, it's been a dedicated project. Now we're asking you to actually step out of your role and become a unit. And usually the founder takes on the manager role here, but not in all cases, because in some cases the innovator is of course not also the right leader. So then we help to make sure that we hire in the right leader for this phase, and the founder or the founders take other roles within that new startup, right?
But they are involved.
They are involved.
And this is a new business.
I don't think we've had anyone drop off.
Yes. Yes, exactly. They prefer to continue to do what they were doing. And this is a new unit or just a separate business unit?
So this is a new unit then reporting into me ultimately. So I run the Ericsson ONE sort of enabling team that drives this process and this agenda, right, for the company. But then I also have the Incubation Industrialization units directly with me up until such point that we take the ignition decision, because that is the formal exit and graduation out of the Ericsson ONE umbrella. And here you're really talking about becoming a scale up within Ericsson, right? So you will have your first real revenue. You will definitely not be profitable, maybe on odd occasions, but you have a plan for executing massive growth at a very attractive, of course, gross margin type of profile. And over time, operationally, we expect that of course there are the right setups for you to be profitable on bottom line as well. But here you have to have the lens, of course, also of similar to how you think about the entire sort of investment space when it comes to something like a venture studio. So when you think about ROIs, I mean, you have to think at least 4 years out, and probably 4 to 7 years to be in the right mind space.
So with
Or
the
ultimately,
decision, they go out from Ericsson ONE, they become separate business unit.
so there's a couple of sort of exit scenarios, and I think we have also a slide on
probably
that
an
one.
image here.
There we go. So there's a couple of sort of exit scenarios that one of these units can take. One is to, and this is one of the things I think we fixed also with the organizational setup that was established roughly 4.5 years ago, same time as we started Ericsson ONE, with the creation of a business unit or business area focused on technologies and new business. We created the space for taking in scale-up types of businesses who, of course, run very different and needs to be measured and operated very differently than a standardized sort of core product within the company. So what you will see is the main exit scenario for almost to the top, right, is that we would ignite one of these business areas into the business area that Ericsson ONE is housed in, and that becomes a new then product offering and a product house within the business area and technologies and new businesses. Alternatives are, depending on how strongly related to some of the other growth business areas that we have in the company, that this unit is. And we have two rather new, or very new, I would say, new business areas who are also growing, and they are not traditionally sort of core Ericsson offerings. So one is what we call the business area Enterprise Wireless Solutions, which actually is the combination of the acquisition of Cradlepoint, an acquisition of another company called Quartus, an internal move of a private networks product, and an incubation out of Ericsson ONE called Industry Connect. Those four assets actually formed the business area Enterprise Wireless Solutions, and was actually exited or carved out of the business area Technologies and New Businesses, where we're housed, right? So this is a huge proof point, not only for Ericsson ONE, but also for the business area per se, in its established process and capability to incubate and accelerate new offerings, to the point of actually the creation of a new business area reporting into the executive team. So a massive plus there. And then we have another business area also newly formed and newly into the company, right, with the closing of the acquisition of Vonage, which is gives us the access to a 1 million plus developer community. So that those two are news, and a lot of our portfolio actually are fit towards there. So another main exit scenario is that they move directly into that, or at least at some point in time during the now acceleration phase and the scale up phase. Then we have probably less often two other exits. One is, of course, that we have a proposition that is so linked to our core and our leadership in mobile networks that it makes sense to move it into one of the other two business areas that we have that are operator-centric hardware, software, and platform technologies. We have quite little of the pipeline towards here because we have an entire company geared around innovating within this space. So it's natural that the Ericsson ONE engine is not primarily driving here. Yes. And I mean, here we have 1,000 plus people in dedicated research. We have 55,000 plus patents in the company. This is a well-oiled technology leadership machinery that's running in Ericsson already, and no need to sort of either disturb or really sort of jump on it. The other real exit, I would say, is also dependent on our review of where do we think the growth phase is best enabled. We may decide and conclude that Ericsson is actually not long-term the best owner. It might be because the proposition or the venture has matured and pivoted a bit, and maybe pivoted away from the why Ericsson, but still have a very strong desirability in the market. Then, of course, we should not shut it down, but we should look at, should we now spin this out, take in external capital, etc. So there is also a spin-off or spin-out vehicle that is a potential exit scenario, of course.
Yeah, that's interesting. And again, because obviously it's clear that, again, you are, I think, the typical sweet spot that you guys are working. I think, obviously, depending on what it comes out of this growth engine, you will decide which is the best location. But as I can see, you are not servicing the core business. You are
not primarily, at least. You could say,
yes.
You could put it this way. If you look at the current pipeline,
yes.
roughly 1/3 of it is related to an operator go-to-market, but not necessarily the types of technologies that we have in our core offering. So even though it's an operator go-to-market, it's often more of an enterprise type of proposition, but it is sold with or through an operator. And then 2/3 of our pipeline is either directed to what's called the focused expansion into enterprise here. So either our business area or the enterprise wireless solutions or global network platform or Vonage, or potentially a spin out, but part of the growth. So that's roughly how the pipeline looks like now.
And as well as it's unlikely that you are really focusing on servicing the core, is also not the typical outcome that you are producing something that has a market on itself. It might happen. If it happens, you will find a way. But again, the sweet spot is the one that you design. I think one very point we made in our prior conversation is what are the KPIs that you are internally using to guide you? Because again, one of the most difficult things inside established company is to sell projects that have an outcome that would produce value in 5 to 10 years. And again, in a world when they are measuring quarters, the metrics of success are quarterly, is a very, very difficult proposition, culturally speaking.
Yeah.
So how do you measure the value that you produce?
It's a great question, and as I mentioned as well, I think with the sort of setup of Ericsson during 2018, and with our new CEO coming in roughly at that point in time, there was a huge understanding for what it means to invest in growth, given where Börje has been operating in his past, as well as how we're setting up the company. So I think there was a much sort of better framing for Ericsson ONE around it, in terms of understanding that this is a different thing, and it needs a different way of measuring and operating. I think that's fundamental, actually. Then I think there are a couple of other things that are fundamental, or were fundamental, as I was setting this up. And one was, I need to also control the financing. There have been many innovation sort of activities or types of propositions in the past. But if you don't own both the chance to execute and the financing of it, plus have a clear exit path, then you are not set up to make it, I think. And all these three were true as we were setting up Ericsson ONE. So that I think is an enabler. Then you're thinking about, what are we then measuring? Because ultimately, as I said in the beginning, I mean, if you put Ericsson ONE onto sort of the typical investment, types of propositions or ways of investing out there, venture investing, strategic partnership, business incubation, etc. We're sort of, I would say we're probably overlapping quite a few. But if you think of the ultimate measurement for return, I mean, we're looking at, of course, wanting to reach somewhere between 20 to 30% internal rate of return on our portfolio at any given time, after our first initial sort of 5-year period of essentially just investing. And we're actually on a good pathway towards that. So that's positive. But you can't wait for the first 5 years to be done and then have the next 5 years be both investing as well as then harvesting, right? So you need something in between. And that's what we really set up here, and what you're looking at in the slide that's now portrayed, right? So when we think about value creation for Ericsson ONE, there are three things that we constantly measure. And one is we call new business value. So what we do is we take the projects or the ventures that we have in our industrialization stage, so the last stage, because we believe that it doesn't make sense to value the MVP pipeline, because the death rate is ultimately too high. But at the industrialization stage, it does make sense. But we of course use a venture cap type of model in terms of a high discount rate on the opportunities. But if we do that only on the four we have in there right now, the valuation in 2025 scenarios between 400 million and $2 billion, which would be a quite significant ROI over by then 6 years of operations. So that would be
this is the estimate of the revenue creation by the portfolio.
Yeah, so the 2 billion, the higher span here is we've taken the assumed business cases that we invested in at the industrialization stage, and we've heavily discounted that based on a typical sort of venture capital model. But what we then said as well was, what if it takes double the amount of time to create this revenue for the same ventures, and then we run the same model, the same comparables towards that number. That's the lower end. So we're being very non-optimistic on the lower span here, which is still representing a healthy ROI, I would say. So that's good. And when it comes to, of course, this becomes a bit tricky to be if we're going to get into sort of the details. Really, we have to, of course, operate under some sort of assumption that once you exit Ericsson ONE, independent of where you exit to, if we were an angel investor or a VC, that's the point in time when you would start to calculate your IRR. So of course it's not a standard internal rate of return, because not all of them, or far from all of them, are going out of the Ericsson umbrella, right? So it still is Ericsson that needs to continue to invest. But given the strength around and the rigid around the process and the framework and the criteria we use, this is the only way. So if we actually are looking to ignite our first opportunity at the end of this year, that would represent us coming close to a single digit negative IRR already after 4.5 years. So we are very close to getting into payback time, which is going to be interesting. So that's good. That's one. The number two thing we measure is what we call customer intimacy. Naturally, if you work with new types of ventures and new types of propositions, you are also driving a lot of thought leadership to the point I made earlier, right, around how our pipeline now actually represents the growth strategy, but was initiated and started when that growth strategy was not established. This is, of course, true also for each of the projects and each of the ventures, that when we talk about these with customers, this is the future we're talking about. So naturally, it becomes an interesting point. But what we want to know is not that we are dazzling the stakeholders and customers with, here's the shiny things we are working on. We want to see them act, and if they act for real, then we deem it to be true customer value and true customer intimacy. So we measure two things. We have an established early adopter program, which is an actual legal framework and contractual frameworks, which are very innovation prone, right? Because naturally, being a big company like ours, our standard contracts with our customers are long-lived, long maintenance, 5 nines in terms of performance, etc. That does not work in the world that I'm operating in and we're operating in. So we've established a very friendly sort of T's and C's framework and program, that we have executed, as you can see, with more than 35 customers since we started. But even more importantly, 13 of those 35 have become programmatic customers, right? So they're part of the program and are participating in more than one project, and usually also in more than one phase. And this is highly valuable, because it's valuable for us, of course, in the speed of vetting ideas and getting the customer and market feedback. But it is also value adding for them in terms of, for the projects that are, and the ventures that are going to make it, they can be very much first to deploy into that market. So we see a great collaboration with these 13. So that's been fantastic.
So the 13 is a subset of the 35 representing
correct.
a customer that have signed more than one agreement.
They have signed our umbrella agreement, which means that they're participating, and then they're executing a set of projects.
It's not a one-off event.
Correct. It's not a one-off event.
Becoming something that they value so much that they sign the overall umbrella agreement. Okay.
Correct. And then the third thing that we measure is, we call it brand value. I mean, naturally, of course, also when you work with these types of projects, you should be a magnet for talent. And I actually believe we are. I mean, some of our projects, we are actually able to hire absolutely superstar talent. We're picking up people from, Splunk, Facebook, Meta, NASA, the list goes on. And these are not the typical types of individuals that we're able to recruit into our company, right? So this is, but this is a bit harder to measure. So what we use is a measurement around Net Promoter Score. So we ask anyone that is interacting with and relying to some capacity on Ericsson ONE to give us a Net Promoter scoring. So this means we ask entrepreneurs that are currently in the pipeline. We ask entrepreneurs that have gotten kicked out of the pipeline. And we ask all the sort of functional areas that are working with Ericsson ONE, but naturally have the same headache that we talked about earlier in terms of how do they enable speed of execution in a large corporate, and we get a score back. And as you can see, I mean, we've got a 50+ Net Promoter Score the last times we've run it. And if you know Net Promoter Score, 30 to 70 is a great score. Above 70 is sort of astronomic, right? And anything above 0 is good, right? So this we are super proud of, because even with projects and individuals that we ultimately have to turn down, we get this type of scoring. So that's great. I would want to actually enhance this scoring though by starting to measure some of the external talent brand value elements, but that's not the most straightforward thing to do. You can imagine how hard it is to get what's Ericsson ONE versus Ericsson in this context, right? So we try to stay away.
But it's good the vision behind, right? To understand the overall value that you're creating, a different, say, with different milestones. One end is the value creation. One end is the ability to work closer with your customer. Another one is the overall impact of the perception of the company as a whole. I think that's interesting. To end our super interesting.
If I may interject with one more thing, I think I talked about the process as sort of a linear thing that happens, right? And I mean, there are essentially three main criteria that we deem any project up against.
Yes.
And those are desirability, feasibility, and viability. So desirability, is the problem real? Do we understand it? Do customers care? Do they want to pay for it, etc.? Feasibility, do we have the tech and the team to actually execute on this plan and actually make this a reality? And number 3, viability, do we foresee a sustainable business model here that actually can also scale and sustain over time? Those are the 3 elements. We are now baking in a 4th element a 4th pillar that we're going to measure on, which is impact. So we're going to look more broadly as well into what type of impact is this driving, not only from a financial standpoint, that will stay true. So we're not going to change the lens of, we're looking really, I don't like the word unicorn, but I mean, that's essentially what we're looking for here, right? We're not looking at incremental, we're looking at game-changing new businesses. But the measurements that we also want to think about is, how does this relate back up to the Ericsson vision, right? Of improving lives, redefining businesses, and pioneering a sustainable future. So how do we measure the ideas and the ventures in terms of their potential impact on the planet and on people? So that's also coming in. But also naturally said, so we measure this, of course, throughout, right? So we run monthly cadence with all projects independent of the stage that they are in. But we also run, particularly for the longer projects, so MVP and industrialization phase, just because you got the decision, right, does not mean that you can execute the entire time frame and the entire budget. It is conditioned upon you delivering on the objectives and key results that you've ultimately set out. And we do that. So we do that very rigorously on a quarterly basis to make sure that we are tracking towards executing on this. And if we don't see that, then of course, either there is a chance to pivot that we think is going to be strong enough to drive us in the right direction, or some of the assumptions that we had walking in may not be true, and we have to fold. So that I wanted to mention that as well, and that actually follows with even at the ignition stage when you are an acceleration unit. So on a quarterly basis, we don't inject money on a quarterly basis because that's too admin heavy. But making sure that you are fulfilling your OKRs and your leading indicators are pointing you in the right direction, that is super important, independent of the stage. Otherwise, you're going to invest for too long.
Yes. Final question for you is, I assume that an organization like Ericsson ONE has its own budget. I would call it fund, because again, you have a capital to be allocated for investing into the different stages. We have a ballpark amount that we can mention in terms of what is the amount, is a fixed amount, is something that you have to renegotiate annually. How does it work? Because that is quite...
we're prone to not share sort of financial figures, so I will not do that. But you have already heard me describe the phases and the typical numbers we see on an annual, so you can probably make it out. But we have so what we do from a budgeting standpoint is we separate the budget that I need, or we need as Ericsson ONE, to run the machinery. And because that is a fixed amount, that is, I have people in Silicon Valley, in Sweden, and in Beijing covering the super.
How many people do you have?
Roughly 30 people across the globe, right? Okay. And they are a super mix of internal Ericsson, external, startup, scale up, big corp, designers, technology, and business. So trying to have this as a diverse team and group as possible, so that we can, in a best way, coach and support these the ventures as they progress. So we're roughly 30 across the globe. That's actually covering marketing, communications, finance, HR, compliance, etc. as well. And then on top of that, that infrastructure needs then, right, to run the machinery. Then we have an allocated budget for financing projects. In the earlier stages, ideation and MVP, it's quite straightforward, because the span of the investments are they sort of gravitate around an average. So we can quite specifically say we need this much to be able to support the funnel that we need.
Because you have some metrics that are quite recurring, yes.
That we bank together, and that we also always get. Then we do a much more rigorous sort of planning around the industrialization phase, because that depends on our forecast in terms of where do we have the pipeline now, how many of those projects will likely advance to that stage, at what pioneer's nest throughout the year, and how much time does it take for them to ramp up according to the plans, etc. So that there's a varying. And there our Pioneer's Nest decision board actually houses quite a few people from our executive team. So my boss who runs the technology and new business, Åsa Tamson, sits there. Our global CFO sits there, our global CTO sits there, the head of the Enterprise Wireless Solutions BA sits there, and our head of strategy sits there as well, right? So, and our global head of marketing, our CMO as well. So quite a well-seasoned team, right? But that is also to make sure that the investment decisions we make are of quality. So we use them as voting mechanisms as well as discussion in terms of are there specific actions, pivots, etc. that we think we should make. But this drives rigor into the process as well, which is...
As always, is highly depending on what project you have in the bakery, and then
correct,
what the capital needs. That's got it. But I think it's an important question to also to assess what are the right ingredients to run something like this. It's always you have the team, and then you have the capital allocation that obviously depends on also where the different projects are. Final question for you. What are the biggest lessons learned in the past few years?
There's many.
More than one.
The list of lessons. I think, you know, we have a saying within Ericsson ONE. There are two sort of cultural traits that we ultimately always look for when we recruit someone else in or we take on a project, and it is brave and curious. If you are not brave enough to try something new, to test and to really jump at something, then you're probably not the type of individual or project or venture that we want to take in. And if you're not curious enough to try and learn and pivot and listen, have empathy, understand your customer, understand what the market really is saying, then you're also not going to be learning enough and learning quickly enough for you to be able to be relevant as this animal is sort of navigating here. So I think those are super key. What I think we've learned, probably one of the biggest lessons for me is, and for us, I think is, how do you use the collective brain around us when it comes to not only deciding what project we should take in, but also in terms of how you're advancing it. There is so much talent around us, both within our company, but as well, of course, as externally. And the biggest mistake you can make is to try and solve all the problems yourself without the right experience and diversity around the table, right? And with that actually quite readily available, how do we ensure and drive so that every project picks up that institutional knowledge for what we are actually trying to solve is probably one of the biggest learnings. Because it doesn't matter how little you remove yourself from maybe some of the core things you know. You need an expert. You need someone that understands and has been there, has operated within the context, has talked to the customers, understands what their pain points are. You can't guess that. So I think that is one of the big learnings. The other is, and this is big, I think, oftentimes we talk about going to market and we think about a channel to that market, could be an operator, for instance, and then an end user or an end customer, right? A customer or a consumer or an enterprise. And it is super dangerous to focus too much on what the channel is telling you in terms of the needs. You need to get the need and ultimately the desirability figured out with the end user. The end user is the only one that matters. They're the ones that are going to care. They're the ones that are going to pay. The channel, of course, you have to incentivize, you have to figure out, and because otherwise you don't have a distribution model, and that's problematic. Yeah. But if you mess up the end user proposition, then you're dead, my friend. So
yeah, okay. I think that's very, very good point. I think I have in mind a multiple example where you just say, so to just visualize in my mind. That's I think super, super good point. Daniel, thank you a lot for this conversation, and congratulations for the good job that you guys are doing. We definitely keep on sync to listen from you also about how this model that looks pretty solid and successful is even evolving in the next few months and years. Thank you.
Thank you, Alberto. Glad to be here.